Look at that. Nailed it. Okay. I'm going to start over in case. So
All right, take two.
Take two. So welcome to Sips and Tips number 2. Super stoked to be here, joined by some of my good friends that I'm going to introduce here shortly. And we're going to be recording this so that we can put it up on telemarkskier.com for our premium subscribers. And yeah, today we're going to be tackling a pretty cool subject. So before I get into that, I want to introduce Mr. Nate Nordell from Freeheel Life. He was our used gear specialist this year and one of our front of house guys, joined by Taylor Johnson, our shop manager, and the famous, infamous Craig Dostie over here, the gear guru himself. So for those joining us, feel free to use the chat feature. You can send us some notes over there. It looks like we've got some people in the house already, and thank you for dropping by. Dylan, hello, and good old friend Bruce Easton coming in from the land of Oz. Good to see you, buddy. So today we're going to tackle a really cool subject that's going on. One of the trends I talked about in the podcast this past week was boot modifications. And one of the most interesting things that I've seen is kind of this uptick of people's interest in modifying their boots. And I think a lot of this, although it's kind of maybe an uptick in trend now, this is something that's historically been part of the Telemark community since many, many years ago, all the way back to when we were using leather boots. And I think what that is the market has produced certain boots, and maybe the skiers start getting better, or they're looking for different applications of the boot. And so what they start doing is start making their own modifications of the boot in order to enhance the performance. So before we get into this topic of conversation, we want to put a disclaimer out there that if you do, we are not encouraging you to modify your boots in any way, and it could cause a safety hazard, and you cutting parts of your boot off might actually make it so that the warranty is not valid anymore. And we just want to make sure that we release all responsibility to you as the individual, and any choices that you make are up to you. So with that said, I kind of prefaced some of these boot modifications dating back a really long way. And I wanted to show you guys a couple examples before I let some of the panelists show some of these more modern day ones. So the first one I could think of that's a kind of a cool boot modification is this is called the Smiley plate. And this is on an old leather Fabiano boot. You can see this little strap that they added at some point. And then these things were like a reinforcement plate that they would use in order to reinforce the 3-pin holes. This one, not as much a massive modification to performance, although the wear and tear on the holes obviously would make you pull out of your 3-pin. So I thought that was kind of a fun one to mention. This next one, now this is where boots really started getting interesting. Somebody donated this one to our museum. Let me pull these laces out of the way. And we've talked a little bit about these on the podcast with some of the old racer people. But the thing I like about this most, so this is actually a leather alpine ski boot from when the alpine boots were still leather. So you'll notice if you look kind of close, there's not really a lot going on here because it was a stiff boot, much like an alpine boot is today. And then it had a stiff sole. So in the early 80s, some of the racers, from what I can tell from talking to these guys, they started finding these alpine boots. And then they would actually redo the welt with a Telemark sole on it. So you can see it's a 3-pin sole on an actual alpine boot. And these things are so stiff and heavy. I mean, this is definitely not like other boots of the day. They're not like a Solo Extremes. They're not like a Fabiano or any of those boots that maybe of that era, a soft leather boot. So this is kind of the first, I'd say, stiff boot mod that you started seeing back in the day. So the next thing that kind of happened in boots back then is the skiers started getting better, and they decided that they were going to modify the cuff of the boot in order to give it more stiffness. There's lots of variations of cuffs that got made. Some of them were aftermarket product that you could add like what they called like a telly cuff that was sort of a stirrup and a cuff. But I think the most well-known one that people hear about is the pickle barrels, or basically just imagine a 5-gallon bucket that you get at like Home Depot. And they started cutting out the curvature of that in sort of a rectangle. Well, like I said, a lot of times it's people starting first and then leading in to the market catching up and starting to make boots. And so probably one of the most well-known boots in Telemark is called the Super Comp. And this boot basically came from these modifications that people were making and incorporated a plastic cuff on top of a leather boot. And obviously it's got 4 buckles and it's got a little strap on the bottom, kind of like an early volet strap. And yeah, these boots were really amazing. They maintained the flex that people wanted of a leather boot, but it gave it the performance of having an inner liner and side to side stiffness and response, but still retained all the other features. So you could use a 3-pin, and most of these started really pushing into the cable binding stuff. So basically that's just to give you kind of a little history lesson that boot mods, as they were, as is the common vernacular now, it's a lot like a hot rod. And people now are starting to dig in to doing all sorts of weird hot rod stuff with their boots. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I wanted to basically just point out modifications. Generally, a lot of times we think of uphill, but they really do get broken down into 2 different categories. There's modifications done to the boots for the uphill, the hikers. That's why everybody seems to think that that's what you're supposed to do. And then there's obviously the downhill performance still that kind of has to do a little more with kind of the history. People are looking for more cuff and rigidity, stiffness, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to pass the time over to Taylor. He's sort of our downhill mod guru, if you will. And he's going to run you through one of his setups and kind of talk a little bit about what he's added to it and maybe some other options that people are adding to their boots that are coming through the shop. So Tay, tell us a little bit about the downhill boot modifications.
Well, yes, I am a fan of the down. I'm not opposed to going up, but I'm primarily a resort skier and looking for as much control and power out of a boot as I can. So TX Comp is my go-to boot. It has been for 5 or 6 years, pretty much since I made the NTN swap. Now, biggest difference to the production version is actually kind of just bringing this to the original version. When this was released with the Candy Cane T-Race generation with the power block. So removed the walk mechanism, and this is the stock Scarpa power block as opposed to the power block tour mechanism that's on the T1s, TX Pros, and TX Comps now. Now, reason for me doing this, I guess, first of all, is the luxury of a couple pairs of boots, because I have toured with this function here. Not ideal, but it was kind of just like I was halfway across the world. This is the pair of boots I brought. I dealt with the lack of rearward range of motion. Now, for me, that power block really makes the biggest difference in terms of energy transfer. So kind of even interesting with that Super Comp, as opposed to my retro boot of choice, the Asolo Extreme Racer. That Super Comp has a little bit of motion forwards, but that kind of backstop on the bottom of the cuff is more just for a back seat, whereas the Asolo boot is just one piece where you have a little more leverage forward. And like compared to, this is a stock TX comp. Let's see, as we flex that, there's just a little bit of play in this bar style mechanism, and I just don't like that. So for me, that was important thing to remove all that slop. I really wanted like immediate energy transfer from my leg into the boot, into the binding, and into the ski ultimately. So that power block really makes a big difference. I would say it certainly feels stiffer compared to the stock boot with the walk mode, but it's more, I think, just the fact that the instant I pressure that shin, my boot is responding to that. The other modification would be the booster strap. This is a little different style of strap as opposed to the Velcro. This uses kind of a camming system. And this particular one, they make these in a couple different flex ratings. This one with the gold buckle is the World Cup booster strap. So it is the stiffest of the, I think, 4 booster strap models they make. So it's got a couple layers of this elastic. So it does have a little bit of flex, but the World Cup version actually has a full strip of this, I think it's nylon webbing that goes all the way around. So it really doesn't flex too much. And, I kind of worked my way up to this more powerful strap from them. They have an expert one that is 3 layers of the elastic without the nylon webbing through the center of it. So it's a little more flexible than the World Cup version. I started with that expert one and then wanted to crank it up a little bit more. So, this is honestly very similar to the stock TX comp that came out in 2010 or 11, whenever they finally fleshed out the entire NTN lineup with starting with TX, TX Pro, and then the TX comp. This was really a race downhill oriented boot. And for me, not having the walk mode, this is a boot that spends 99% of the days in the resorts. So, my butt's on a chairlift going up. So not concerned with range of motion. I'm trying to limit any sort of range of motion. I don't want any movement, any play in that. And that's a part that is sort of sourceable. You kind of got to find some old TX comps nowadays and kind of swap them out. The power block touring mechanism that comes on these boots stock will bolt on to the boots that have these stock, the old, like, more yellow with gray accent version. That's pretty much the extent of the modifications currently. One more mod that I think we're going to attempt this year is I'd like to try a carbon fiber sheet underneath the liner and on the inside of the sole to see if I can stiffen up the sole flex of the boot a little bit. And we'll see how that goes. I think we can get some sheets of carbon, and we got a bandsaw in the Freeheel Life warehouse that we might try and trim some up to really stiffen up that sole to see if I can crank out a few more horsepower out of that boot. But that's pretty much the extent of the mods to that boot. I actually did the same I got a pair of T1s this year as well, just because it's still fun to have some 75 days, even though I'm very pro NTN. But did the same with the from the Candy Cane T race, blocked it up. I'm not going to be touring on 75 mil these days, so this is just a resort boot when I feel like ripping around on a vise for a binding like that. One thing to note is that if you're looking for on the NTN version, the red one is off the T race, and you'll notice the kind of bottom of it has some curvature to it. Just the shape of the scaffo, which is the lower of these boots, is slightly different. That allows that to fit on the T1s or the T races. But on the NTN version, it's flat across here. So This one will fit on this boot, but the red ones do not fit on the NTN boots without additional modifications. So if you're looking to, stiffen up the TX comp or take that little bit of, couple degrees of play out of a walk mode on an NTN boot, it'd be best if you can find some silver ones, or maybe you got a buddy with a machine shop that would be willing to build you some aftermarket ones of those. But that's pretty much the extent of my boot modifications, and the intent is really downhill power. I want solid connection and energy transfer from whatever my body is trying to make those skis do. The inherent lateral stability of the NTN system. Outlaw X is my normal binding of choice. I also pair that with the stiff springs. So pretty much a full horsepower setup. And then, this year I was on the Protector prototypes, or the Telemark prototypes that became the Protector lineup. And that first version was a pretty high horsepower ski as well. Not all of my friends quite enjoyed that ski, but I might be, we figured it out for the production version. We tuned her down a little bit, but that's pretty much my extent of that. Looks like Bobby Tuslow has done the carbon sheet, so I might have to hit him up on that and see how many mil thick or what type of weave he did on that, because I'd be curious to see if we can get even a few more horsepower out of that boot.
Tay, one thing I was going to mention is how you put the booster strap opposite, like
that's the Telemark classic move.
Yeah, I think technically the booster cam is supposed to be on the other side, so these straps are left and right, so it's kind of like you have your buckles on the outside. For some reason, I find this easier to pull from the inside of my boot, so I guess I put the right strap on the left boot here, but same functionality. The cam strap I like a little more than just a Velcro strap too, because I can cinch it up just tighter. It still has, this World Cup version has just a few degrees of flex. It flexes a little bit, or that one with the black strap. This is an older pair of. There's a lot of boots laying around here in the management office here at Freeheel Life, but this black strap is the expert one that's slightly softer, but still like that strap on the inside. So I've tinkered around with that, but that's a power block pair as well. I guess that's just the backups, and I got the gamer set of TX comps ready to go when the snow starts flying here.
Do any of your comps in your office have the Wyatt reverse toe buckle mod on them?
I have not done that yet.
Okay.
I like that. I guess I think I've seen Wyatt do that. I'm also the opposite of Wyatt, where I basically get my boots where they're comfortable and I don't touch my buckles at all. He's undoing his buckles every run, so it's a minor inconvenience to me that the stock buckle goes this way. Wyatt, our head ski tech at Freeheel Life, he flipped the catch and the buckle, and he might have had to use a different buckle because these were a bit long for some reason on the other side, but basically allows the buckle to be on top of the boot. And if you are boot packing or something like that, or you want to undo that buckle, it's a little nicer when the actual buckle is sticking up through the middle of the boot. Just because if this is dangling around as we're boot packing or something, right, that can get hit by snow. But I have these boots pretty much buckled up. I think I would say I have a Scarpa foot. I'm a very easy fit in the Scarpa boot. I don't have issues with it. I can just get in that boot and do a heat mold and got a footbed, and we're good to go. I'm lucky enough to not deal with foot pain like some of our customers, but maybe someday.
Yeah, and Tay, that was thanks for giving us that overview on the downhill. I think that's a good segue into, and I thought we talked about this before we hopped on, but I mean, you're always thinking downhill, and I wanted to, I know you're like the guy that's going to hike with a power block on, and I thought that might be a good segue to getting Dosty in the mix, because he doesn't have a walk mode from what I remember. And I thought maybe he could show us a little bit about what he's done with his I think it's your TX boots, right, Dosty?
Yes, yeah, my TX Pros, which
Oh, it's not the TX.
yeah,
Do you
yeah,
still
these
walk mode on your TX.
yeah, yeah. So I still have the lever here. I haven't taken that off, but I got rid of the rest of the hardware. There's no post here. It's gone. Don't need it because I always ski in walk mode. And I just want to back up a little bit. You know, it's interesting how boot mods have changed. So when we were dealing with leather boots in the 70s and 80s, we were doing everything we could to beef up the performance. And so the result was Merrill Super Comp, and then eventually that turned to all plastic Telemark boots. And suddenly, I mean, we didn't just slowly increase, it just rocketed up, right? And what happened when we did that is we got all this amazing performance and we sacrificed the versatility of the uphill. And it took a while for people to recognize that. And so I think that's why a majority, not all, but a lot of the emphasis these days is now on making the boot more uphill friendly, because we have great performance for downhill. I mean, I'm an example, okay? I think the performance is so good with plastic. I got rid of the walk mode because I ski and, you know, I got rid of the option. I'm always in walk mode, okay? And once I lock the cuff, to me, that's stiff enough. Now, granted, in a downhill race, Tay will win.
We have different priorities. That's okay.
We do. And I'll admit, in an uphill race, Tay will win. But that's age. Okay. So that's one of the things I do with this. The other thing was that I put on a K2, basically a buckled Velcro power strap. And the TX Pro used to come with 2 buckles on the cuff. I got rid of both of them. I just went with this. It's a fairly thick Velcro strap. I'd call that maybe 1.5 inches wide. And it also removes, which I thought was a good idea. I'm not so, let's just say it doesn't add the versatility that I thought it would add, because when you take it off, it's just flopping around, okay? Which is nice maybe when you're removing your boots, okay, that you can completely undo this without having to undo the Velcro. That's great. The other part about this that I was less than excited about, and the difference between it being locked and free, I was hoping was going to be greater, so that suddenly I would have a lot more range of motion in the cuff forward. But the reality is, for me to get the range of motion that I really want, I still have to undo the Velcro, reset it to make it really loose for going uphill. As far as the rearward range of motion, I could probably get a little bit more out of it if I took this and trimmed it down. I haven't trimmed it yet, but I probably will. I first wanted to make sure that this thing wasn't too loose for going downhill. But it's plenty loose enough for those who like to ski in walk mode. Completely getting rid of the walk mode bar, I don't think is going to be a compromise. You know, you'll save a few ounces while you're at it. Nothing that you're going to really dramatically notice. I think the only major thing is you don't have to worry about it accidentally flipping into downhill mode, and it's always in walk mode. It's for those who are comfortable skiing that way. And I'll admit, we're a minority, but I think we're a pretty big minority. It's not like, you know, 4 or 5%. I'm shooting from the hip here. I'm guessing about 20 people, 20% of telemarketers like to ski in walk mode. I don't know. Do you got any stats on that, Josh?
No, I don't know, but I think something that's interesting is that people that tend to have learned on a lower cuff boot. I think what you're showing is it mimics the motion that you have in, if you're coming from like an old T2, old T3, leather boots, whatever.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, in fact, you know, a lot of my friends who are closer to my age, when they converted to plastic tele boots reluctantly, kind of like I did too, they were like, man, I can't get used to these things. And I was like, put it in walk mode. And at first they were like, no, no, no. I mean, you know, you're supposed to flip it down for downhill mode and flip it up for walk mode. I said, well, just keep it in walk mode and give it a whirl. And almost always they're like, wow, I like that so much better. So it's something they're more familiar with and comfortable with. So, you know, that's just kind of, I agree with you. It tends to be where you're coming from and what did you start out on? Was it a soft boot or was it a stiff boot? And also,
Yeah, I think that
what's your aggression level?
my anecdotal evidence from talking to people in the shop is the people that are walk mode skiers, you know, generally older, which means they probably tellied for a long time, which means they probably start on a low top lace up. I mean, there's certainly some outliers to that. You know, my father is a old school telemark skier that started on, you know, 3-pins, leather boots, but he was accepting of technology. You know, he got a pair of the Extreme Racers as soon as those were available and he had the money for it. He got a pair of the Terminators right away. He went to a T-Race right away. You know, he's always looking for, he's also a resort skier, so he's looking for more of that downhill performance. He's not a walk mode guy, but, you know, he kind of maybe followed the whole trend of power and accepted that, where some of us, if we think people are bitter about switching from 75 to NTN, then, you know, people were probably really bitter about switching from leather to plastic.
Oh yeah, I was very reluctant, you know.
I have one question on that boot, Dusty. Is that the wrap liner in that boot?
It is a
overlap
wrap
liner?
liner. Yeah, I added a wrap liner after the fact. I think it originally came with a tongue liner, but you know, the other part of the mods that I tend to make all have to do with a fit. I have a low volume foot, which means I have a very low instep, which means right at the, you know, where the elbow of your foot is, okay, there's no material there.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, the overlap liner, having 2 layers of foam there. I think one thing that's now inspired another mod of mine is I think I might try a wrap style liner next year, because if I got 2 layers of fabric like this, I'm not going to get as much flex as if I have the tongue liner, you know, surrounded over here where that tongue liner can flex. I think part of the reason why some of the Scarpa Telly boots have come with the overlap or the wrap style liner, and then now they're all available with the tongue liner, is that tongue liner probably is just a little more forward range of motion for less resistance, rather than having 2 layers of fabric overlap. So I don't know, interesting thought there. I might try a new liner next year.
Yeah, no, I think for downhill performance, you'll prefer the overlap. Just you've got more material, okay?
Yeah.
And the tongue liner would be better for touring, okay? But for me, I go with the wrap because I'm trying to fill volume. And even though the 2 layers tend to fill most of it, even for me, I still need to add pads.
Yeah.
To hold me in place. That brings me to my other boot, my TX, and most of the mods I've made with this. So I'm probably going to get rid of the stake on this, since I proved that I can with the TX Pro, the older TX Pro. And I didn't want to go too far. It's as Josh said, when you start making these mods, if you make a mistake, you screwed your boots. You know, there's no going back, and then you're going to have to get replacement parts. And if you mess up the scapo, you're going to have to buy a whole new boot. If you mess up the cuff, you might be able to get a new cuff, but not if you mess up the lower boot. So I was reluctant to get rid of this. I think I'm going to get rid of this in the next round of modifications, but I'm going to first make sure I get a spare cuff, because I think I'm going to get really radical. But first, I'll talk about what I do for a lower volume foot. The main thing I do, look at that instep buckle. It's missing. Where is it? It's underneath the tongue. Now, to be able to do that, you have to change the size, the length of that instep strap. And the other thing is, it has to be an older style Scarpa or a crispy, because the new instep straps from Scarpa don't really, there's a.
Yeah, that's not gonna go underneath,
Exactly.
but
You
the
can't get
ratchet
that.
style would, yeah.
You can't get that underneath. So for me personally, I prefer the older ones because I can, but when you do, you've got to shorten this up. So I had to cut the cable and swage it, okay, with a swager. And I've got a really low instep. I think I took out about 3/4 of an inch on the cable length for both of the cables. All right. That's just based on rough memory. And let me see here on the liner. I can't remember if I did it with this one or not. I think I did it on the TX part. Yeah. So this is a new liner that I remolded, but what I did on my previous liner, because over time this will compress, I added padding around the instep just because I needed it, because my foot has such low volume. The other thing I did with the TX here is I got rid of the Velcro power strap, because I really hate having to basically undo the Velcro every time I go into turn mode. So I put a long belay strap on, and the beauty of this is, you know, I cinch it down. And to me, this kind of makes up for a booster strap because it's elastic, and you can really cinch it tight and it holds. It doesn't give, it's got a little bit of elasticity, but it doesn't give too much. And then when I go to tour mode, it's very easy to just loosen that, and it stays loose and it doesn't flop around too bad. And I get a lot of range of motion on the cuff. And I'll get more when I get rid of this stake, which that's probably my next mod. I got one other mod in mind. So now this one's crazy, all right? So like I said, I'm gonna have to get a spare set of cuffs before I do this. But what I wanna do is increase the range of motion to the back. I can only go so far with this stake there, all right? And even if I got rid of the stake and chop this down here, I still am not going to be able to go as far back as a lot of the AT boots. So how could I possibly go any further back? Well, I could slice my cuff and completely open it up so that my foot, even though the cuff won't go back, my foot will go back further. And then I could just maybe change the position of the power strap and tighten it all up.
I would probably just attempt like dremeling or shaving all this plastic off first. But
you know what?
man.
I thought of that. The problem is if you dremel this off, there's a limit to the height of the scaffold, and so it'll pop over that, and you've got a leak for snow. So you
need
can't
a gator,
too much of this
1980s style.
You can't take too much of that away. I can take this away, but I can't take much of this
Hey, Dosty,
away. Yeah.
your voice here, give me a little sound check real quick, because I think when you're putting the boot up for some reason.
Oh no, my boot's getting in the way of the mic. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So if I'm talking into the boot, you can hardly hear me.
Oh, that's pretty good. And one thing, two questions, Dosty. You call it the stake, but that metal piece that's coming out. I mean,
Yeah.
basically the way you remove that is just by taking a punch, taking out that little pin. Maybe show them the
Yeah.
pins that you're taking out.
You got to make sure. So when you look at the stake, the diameter is smaller on one side than the other. So you want to punch it from the small side towards the large side.
Yeah.
Otherwise it won't come out.
Yeah. And for people that are wondering, that's sometimes that old pin can break too. Like I've seen that with really aggressive skiers where the pin will actually snap in half. And you can source that pin. I think sometimes we have them in where you can replace them like that. The other question I was going to ask you too is how much range of motion? I mean, that's always a big thing for you is the ROM, the range of motion. How much of an increase percentage wise from a stock boot? Are you gaining a lot on the walk mode, I guess, if you don't shave it down, and how does that help you?
Well, so here's, we're chasing something partly because we have envy with AT boots that have these huge ranges of motion to the rear. Like some of them will go like 25 degrees to the rear. Okay. And what that allows is a longer stride because your foot can go back further because the cuff's not getting in the way, right? But the reality is for the average person, unless you're racing, unless you're skimo racing, okay, you really don't need that much of a longer stride as long as you're going fairly uphill. I mean, the only time I really feel like my existing range of motion is getting in the way is when I'm on the flats. As long as I'm going uphill at least 10 to 15 degrees, I don't care. What I have is good enough. Okay. It's just on the flat. So, for the average person, the main reason you want more range of motion on a tele boot is you're doing a long tour where you expect to go across flats for an extended period of time. That's where, an extended stride really helps you. But generally going uphill, I find even though this is limited, maybe, I don't know, minus 10 degrees range of motion, I'm not running into that very often. Okay. What I tend to notice more actually is how much forward range of motion I want. And so there, I think really the key thing is you want to limit the flex resistance of the whole system. And the liner is a big part of that. And that's where a tongued liner can be an advantage over an overlap cuff. It's just it's holding you back. It can't really open up that easy.
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, that was a good intro into uphill performance, Dosty. I think that's a good kind of lead into Mr. Nate Nordell. And he's got a couple boots that I'm gonna have him show. Oh, actually,
I'll let you introduce.
Yeah, I guess I was gonna show this first. This is one of the boots that is in our museum. And this was actually, so the first time I started seeing the Mistrale cuff added to stuff, this is a boot from Weston Deutschlander, Weston D, you can see him on Instagram. And he was the first guy I ever saw kind of playing with this. And I think he was trying to get some performance out of the cuff he liked better. And also I think he was trying to get some of the range of motion. I don't think he did a whole lot of shaving or anything like that, but he did get the Mistrale cuff on there. So I just wanted to show that. I mean, this boot dates back to probably 2011 is probably maybe when that was around, 2012. So it's been around for a while, but Nate's going to show kind of a version of his in an NTN model and kind of walk us through some of his mods.
Okay. To start things off, this is my third rendition of this boot. I will be making a fourth this fall. So to start off, this is a Scarpa TX Pro with a Mistrale cuff. And now it looks kind of wonky. I call this one the Ghost because I went with the women's strap, liner, and tongue for replacements on the original Scarpa TX Pro. But the big modification is going to be the Mistrale cuff. And a lot of people like this mod, and I feel like they like it for the wrong reasons. A lot of people, I feel like, go to this mod for weight savings, and it is not a weight savings mod. The weight savings I got from this was essentially the removal of a buckle. So it's a 3 buckle rather than a 4. And then I did some plastic shaving on the back of the cuff here, where Dosty was kind of saying there is a limit to how far you can shave down until you leak. First pair of boots I had that I did this to actually leaked. And so every day that I would tour in anything deeper than an inch or 2 of fresh snow, the back of my heel would get wet with about an hour or 2 of use. The first rendition of these, again, towards the disclaimer, first edition of these, I blew 3 of the 4 cuff bolts at Pebble Creek on our World Telemark Day trip. Luckily, I brought a pair of comps as well. But boot mods are inherently dangerous, and I have broken more boot modded boots than I have any other boot that I hadn't modded. So where it does give some performance, it does come with some risk. For me, I did this mod for the range of motion, very similar to the Dosty way. When you get this totally undone, I have shaved down the back, not totally down past the bar, if you can see in there, but pretty close to where I feel the bar is safe and it's not going to tear out with me skiing these hard. But the range of motion on these, I would say, is probably, oh, there we are. I would say it's as much, if not more, than what Dosty's getting with his TXs or his TX Pros, probably about the same. But I have done a little bit of shaving there, as well as on the inside of the boot on this plastic on the scoffo. I've done a bit of shaving, as well as the Mastrale cuff fits tighter than a lot or than the standard TX Pro cuff. And so I had to shave on the inside of the cuff as well as on the scoffo so that this actually will slide and isn't super grabby.
Yeah, that was a few late nights in the Freeheel Live Tech Shop for sure.
To say the least. The first time we did this mod, Taylor very casually said, "It's bolt on, man. Like, it'll be easy." And we started work about 8 o'clock, and we didn't leave until about 3 in the morning, and we still weren't done. So it's definitely been some late nights in the shop of tinkering and just seeing what will work. But for me, this is an improvement from the TX Pro. I plan to do it with the women's TX Pro and the Gia cuff for an all blue and white version of this, much cleaner than this boot. Taylor, if you could pull that picture up really quick.
So
Sure.
I got a question for you, Nate. So
Yeah.
I know that most people who did the Mastrale modification or any variation of that, it was for the range of motion, but the cuff by itself feels stiffer than a TX cuff. So did you notice an improvement in lateral stability?
It is stiffer. I feel that I would say it's about 10% stiffer, but it is slightly awkward with the removal of one of the buckles. The pressure points aren't quite as articulate with the 4 buckle design that the TX Pro is designed for. But I feel that it performs very similarly, maybe slightly stiffer in the cuff. Both of my editions of the TX Pro Mastrale that I've done have been on the older version. So this fall, I'm going to be doing it on the most current version with the most current Mastrale cuff as well. And we'll see if that actually does give a stiffer feel. And with a new boot, just straight out of box, I'm not even going to ski it before I try modding it this time.
Yeah. Have you skied it in walk mode?
I have skied it in walk mode. I like a back seat.
Okay.
Get a lesson from me come fall. Get you in the front of those boots.
Yeah.
Nate, did you want to look at that, or you want me to share
Yeah,
that one?
just pull that up just for a quick reference of kind of what I'm going for. I think I'm going to go with the slightly older Gia cuff that's blue rather than the black one.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe we're jumping around a little bit, but this is the Telemark is Undead Instagram page, full of wonderful modifications. But I think this is one of my favorite too. Nate really cares about matching things, but this looks very clean. And one thing I would point out is the flip style lever. Like, I'll stop screen sharing here for a second. I've got a pair of I
Atomic
have
tack
never skied these. This is a AT boot. I haven't locked it down since I was 7 years old, but these flip style bars are pretty sick because any sort of system with that bar is going to have some level of resistance. So this is an Atomic AT boot, but that style of flip lever just lets that cuff roam a little more free. So I think off that modern Scarpa boot with the flip style lever, that's a good mod. There's a couple other pretty awesome ones on here. Some of these a little more wild than others. Maybe Dossie would like that one. No cuff,
No,
just gator on the top. That's a pretty good one actually. There's some funny ones on here. That's our friend Elliot Gore. He's got a crispy foot and likes a stiff boot. He has all sorts of boots. He's got old F1, similar to what Nate's probably going to show you here in a minute, but that was kind of a crossbreed of the Scarpa cuff and the crispy lower. So that is like a pretty powerful touring oriented boot mod telly boot, because he can ski it in the links, which can be set up pretty powerful. I would say, at least, especially with that Mistrale RS, which is the stiffer of the Mistrale boots, it's like the 125 flex rating. It probably pairs up pretty good, and it's a stiff cuff, stiff boot. This took a lot more modification than Scarpa to Scarpa, which kind of makes sense. We had to drill a few other holes into the scoffo, the lower of the boot, to get that cuff to line up for the kind of geometry of that. But that was kind of a fun mod. He was due for a fresh pair of Crispies for him, and so he decided to mod that one up.
really quick, kind of going back to that walk bar tag.
Yeah. Well, there's a Crispy with that same Atomic walk bar right there. Did you? Yes, Nate.
The F1.
He's gonna have to hop back over.
Sorry.
All right. No more screen share. Okay, you're back live, buddy.
So the F1, really odd. Nobody wanted the stepchild of boots, where it was an AT boot where they put a bellow in it, and the bellow was supposed to make better striding and more comfort. I find that bellows actually decrease my uphill performance when it gets to the steeps, where the boot wants to flex, where I want to just keep moving uphill. That being said, the F1 has one of these great flip latch modes for the walk.
Not just the flip, but it also closes that top buckle too, which is pretty slick.
And so it actually does a whole closure, as you can see here, kind of. When you close that, it really cinches that boot down and gets it ready for ski mode. But it makes a really quick transition from uphill to downhill and vice versa, where you can just flip this and now your upper buckle is loose and ready to go. There you go, Dosty. Maybe something to try and emulate on your boots.
trust me, I'm looking for an F1 that fits me on eBay.
Yeah. So
Let me add one, just to add one thing to the F1, where this really came into play was with the original Olympus Mountain Gear TTS, because before Nate jumps into what he's about to do, basically people were using the tech toe. This is where Mark Langell came up with the OMG binding, the OMG TTS, because he had the tech toe, but he was able to use the heel throw and actually put it over the back of the heel. So originally that's kind of what people were using, is trying to find those. And Is it the F3 that also has the bellow, Dusty?
S3 also
Yep,
has the
yep,
bellow.
F3. It's a bigger cuff.
There's a
Gotcha.
couple
Bigger
versions
cuff,
of that F1
slightly
boot too.
stiffer.
This is the carbon version or the carbon race. I forget what they call it. I think they made 3 versions. They made one bellows, carbon cuff, super light, like nuts, range of motion. And I've never skied these. I've owned these for like 3 years. I've never skied these, but I think they made, like Nate has, with the fabric tongue and the P-backs upper, and then they have a third version that's almost like a T2 that has P-backs tongue as well. So they had 3 versions of these. These are floating out there somewhere, but this thing weighs nothing, but I've never skied this. So sorry, I don't have any feedback on this. This just kind of collects dust in the office.
Yeah. So
Tay, you will be underwhelmed with that thing, Tay, in downhill mode.
Yeah, it's not really my style, but it is like, if I was for some reason needed maximum like range of motion and weight savings just for up, I guess that would probably be the ticket. That was our boot of choice for one of our buddies, Elliot, who was that same guy we were doing the Mistrale World Cup Crispy. He was training for the Grand Traverse Skimo race on a Tele kit, and he used that boot, and that was as light and fast as possible of a Telemark boot that he could find to do that on a TTS kit.
So, like Josh kind of introduced the TTS and the influence with this boot. For me, coming into the shop and learning about the TTS and all the history and finding out that there's odd boots like this, really drew me to the TTS, and that's what really started me on trying to shave weight, is going TTS. And I since have moved on to better downhill performing bindings that may come at a slight weight upgrade. But with this boot, to not ski it with the TTS, you have to do a little mod like this. The Michael Bolton duck butt, if you can see that.
So shout out to Bobby Too Slow, who sent us some Michael Boltons, and he 3D print. Is that one of the?
Yeah.
I guess they're all 3D printed. So
And so this was honestly, this mod was probably easier than the Mistrale mod. Took a little bit more of triple checking and making sure that everything was lined up right. But I find that skiing this boot in the links, I've actually taken this boot, put it in a links on my bent Chetler 120s and skied a couple of resort days, which is kind of crazy and stupid and silly. But honestly, my goal day one was, can I blow up the boot? Will the boot hold up? And 2, how does it ski? Does it give enough performance and power for such a lightweight 2-buckle boot? And I found that it isn't as much power as my pair of Scarpa TX boots, but it is definitely enough. And especially in the backcountry, when you're going to take it a bit more mellow and not be crushing power laps on groomed runs at the resort, this boot definitely gives enough power. I do wish I had the slightly beefier version that has the full plastic tongue, P-backs tongue. Our buddy Elliot has a pair of those, as well as my roommate has a pair of the F3s, and he really likes using those in his TTS system. But really fun mods. This is probably my favorite boot because it's actually a huge difference from coming even from something like this. This is almost a third of the weight, definitely under half the weight of something like this, with more range of motion and not at a huge loss of power, which is the big thing, where if you're cutting weight, you're usually cutting downhill performance as well.
yeah, so I think that that's kind of the one that we wanted to end on. And like we said, old Bobby Too Slow. Is it Dossie? Is it Tuso? Is that his last name? Tuso?
Tuso is his last name. That's why. And I think it's just his self-deprecation, because I know he does a little bit of skimo racing. So calling himself Bobby Too Slow, let's put it this way, I would never catch him on the uphill.
And we need to probably find, I'm going to try and get him on the podcast. I think he's on here tonight, or was.
He is. He actually, he said that. So one of my concerns with what Scarp is working with on their new boot, and the big thing that I know that we can all count on, we've talked about this, is that when it ever comes to market, it will definitely have an increased range of motion in the cuff for better walk mode. That's absolutely a given. And personally, my only concern with that is I ski in walk mode, right? But I don't want the walk mode to be so loose that it really rakes back. Like I want an intermediate, if you will, the current old school walk mode for going downhill, and then an exaggerated walk mode for going uphill, right? And so my concern is that it's going to be locked or super, super loose. But he suggested that maybe there's some rumors that they've developed a mode switch that has an intermediate spring-loaded value mode, so that people like older guys like me who like to ski in walk mode will still have that feeling, and then there'll be a different walk mode. So hopefully that's true. I mean, I don't know that it is, but I hope that's true. So thanks, Bobby, for that info.
Yeah, no, and I'm just going through a couple of questions right now that people have written in while we're on here. And Adam was asking about buying a new boot this year, Scarpa TX Pro. Any ideas how different it is from the new boot from Scarpa will be? Is it worth waiting for? Simple answer, and we've talked about this before. Don't wait. I mean, honestly, I don't think there's a new boot like right on. I think it's in the works. We know that, we talked about that, but I don't think waiting is really going to be the name of the game, at least for this next season. Let me just spin through a couple of these questions real quick.
Yeah, and part of the reason we're having this talk about boot mods is don't wait, modify your boot as long as you're willing to take the chance and the risk. Okay, because we don't know, we've thought for the last 3 years it'll be out next year. Well, here we are 3 years later, and when it's going to come, it's even more nebulous than ever. So we don't know. Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the reason I started thinking about this and thinking about talking about it tonight was it's cool to see, like we said, we mentioned the Instagram account, Telemark is Undead. What a great way to, be able to look at what other people are coming up with. And, people are just having fun out there. And I think that, really, I would be hard pressed to think that Scarpa and Crispy are probably not paying attention at some point to that. Much like the Super Comp, guys start attaching, 5-gallon buckets to their boots, and next thing you know, you got the Super Comp. So real quick, one question was newbie question. How do you shave? Is it with a Dremel? I would say majority is Dremel.
Start with a razor blade, cut the big chunks, and then use a Dremel for fine sanding. Thing is, with the Dremel, if you're not careful, you're just going to melt the plastic. Like our newbie year 1 guy, T2 did here. He ruined a pair of Scoffos trying to do some boot mods.
Awesome. That's a big thing too. Yeah. If you're using anything on that P-backs, even if you're drilling holes, you got to be really careful to go slow so you don't melt it down. One guy said the teardrop shaped head worked well for me. I think he's talking about the spring loaded. Yep. Bobby Too Slow chimed in. For anyone interested, Phantom Splitboarding sells those atomic levers for $19 a pair. They also sell spring-loaded ones. So it sounds like you can get some of those spring-loaded levers.
And those do work with the mod. it takes a slight adjustment of one of those holes where up here takes a slight adjustment of one of these holes, but those buckles will work with the Scarpa boot.
Bobby Too Slow was a nickname from Little League. I got caught stealing a lot. That's hilarious. Okay. Well, I think, thank you everybody
like-
for,
Josh, looks like we got a couple questions in this Q&A section from
maybe.
Jamie saying, can you spend a minute talking about upgrading your boot liner? What brands are out there? Does it vastly improve longevity, comfort, performance of the boot? I have a T1. I would probably recommend Intuition brand liner. They're kind of the gold standard of, in my mind, of the best foam, probably the warmest foam. They have a lot of different thicknesses of foam, different, like Dossie was showing, the overlap style versus the tongue style versus, some with laces, some without. I would probably start with an Intuition liner. There's a company out there called Zip Fit that does this cork injected liner. There's Surefoot, I think, does another foam injection thing. As far as improving longevity of a boot, absolutely, the liner is going to wear out a lot faster than the Scafo or the rest of the boot, plastic of the boot. So a fresh liner can really go a long ways as far as, just liner's going to pack out after so many days. I would say after 100 days on a boot, I really notice a liner being packed out. That may be 10 seasons for some of us. That may be 1 season for someone like Nate that is committed to triple-digit ski days per season. And fit, comfort, kind of depends on what we're looking for, if we want a stiffer foam or a softer foam. And then one question from Bruce about punching the boots. Kind of depends on the boot fitter. Anything kind of away from the bellows is acceptable. I would probably not recommend heating, punching, grinding anything near the bellows. Probably just wear those out faster. But
I got to throw in a comment on that, Tay.
yeah,
So I learned the magic for punching by the bellows, because this is the common spot that you need to punch with the tele boot. The your sixth, what's called the sixth toe in boot fitting parlance. Okay, so wanting to punch right here is a really common thing, but the problem is if you heat the plastic there, you can destroy the bellows because you can overheat the bellows. So how do you do it? You can do it. The key is it has to be in season. You have to have snow out in back. You have to know that with P-backs, you've got to heat it slowly. So you heat it, take the heat off, because otherwise you can melt the P-backs, okay? You got to heat it, relax, let the heat penetrate, heat it some more, let the heat penetrate, heat it some more, let the heat penetrate. But over the bellows, you just put, you just hold some snow. Just grab a fistful of snow, hold it on the bellows, and that will keep the bellows cold, and you can heat this. And the other thing is, because it's P-backs, it has to be in the punch 24 hours or it will relax and all your effort will be wasted.
Yeah, P-backs is kind of a unique plastic that it like wants to hold its originally molded shape. Can I screen share just a couple other of my favorites from the Telemark is Undead Instagram?
yeah, why don't you do that and then we'll wrap up.
Okay. All right, screen share incoming. I think that's a good one. 75 ain't dead. It's on life support. That's a good Mistrale T1 with the new style flip bar mechanism. There's a couple wild ones here with bolt-on duck butts. That seems to be pretty common. That's pretty similar to Nate's. Nate did add a power strap. This one popped up, I want to say like 2017. Pierre Moyad from the M Equipment and Pierre G.
Janot.
He is, I think, Dina Fit's lead boot designer. this is basically a Dynafit boot that somehow they've got some sort of fabric across the bellows. We had an old article on telemarkskier.com about this years ago. I don't know what has become of this project, but that is like a full carbon boot. I don't know how it's skied, never really asked Pierre. There's another one with an AT boot that looks like they cut some bellows out of them, got some sort of fabric across there. No idea how that skis without a bellow, but a stiff alpine sole probably. Let's see. Yeah, I got the duck butt there.
That material that they're using to cover that is Gorilla Tape or carbon fiber weave tape.
Yeah, that's another weird one with the AT chopped the bellow through there, bolted a duck butt. That seems like more of a project than I'm interested in personally. This one is quite hilarious. It's a Tecto modded 75 millimeter boot. So that is rather interesting. Shaved off the duck bill and bolted a Tecto to that. I guess loves the fit of his crispy and wanted to ski him in a TTS system or something. I can't tell on this
no,
one.
that's actually, that's ingenious. That I think, so some of the AT boots, they had like some of the early Technicas, you bolted on the toe and the heel to make it tech compatible. So it looks like what they did is they took one of those and modified the scafo so they could bolt that on, because that insert is molded inside that plastic.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's kind of a wild one. I don't see a duck butt on that, but I don't see a photo either. So maybe just a TTS setup. We've got, this is a wild cam strap system, volley strap mod, straps that run across there. That's a pretty wild one. Zip strap on the bottom. That's like full buckle moddage. This one's quite hilarious for those of us that maybe ski with a very tight stance and wear through bellow guards. The bellow guards are, at least in North America, are available and about $30 a pair for the plastic ones. So if you don't want to spend $30, once every couple of years to replace those, that's a wild one. Let's see.
Call that the edge detuner, Taylor.
Yeah, I might detune the inside edges a little bit. Shout out to Dosty, got a little fame on Instagram. There's a couple funny, interesting binding ones on here. This one I think is pretty wild too. It looks like he's got a carbon tongue and then a carbon cuff, I think with that same atomic lever. I'd be interested to see how that skis, just because the properties of carbon fiber are going to be a bit stiffer, but it's probably shaved some weight. So that's a pretty heavy mod. Good on you for that one. And then this one's kind of interesting because it's an F1 with a Mistrale cuff. So might be maybe a bit of a downgrade in range of motion, but I bet that cuff is a lot stiffer than the stock cuff. So maybe a combination of looking for a little more downhill power out of that. But there's some cool stuff on here, and shout out to everybody that's getting wild with their boot mods. There's some good ones on there. So maybe some inspiration, but again, I would say it's a project you got to be willing to kind of take on. You need a good workshop and some patience, and maybe attempt it with, if you're gonna get a new pair of TX Pros or something and you've got an old pair that still have some life left in them, I probably wouldn't take the knife to a $700 pair of brand new NTN boots. But if you found a $50 pair, some beater pair on Craigslist or whatever, maybe that's where you start with your boot modding journey.
Absolutely. eBay rules for do-it-yourself.
Right on, everybody. Well, thanks to Mr. Dosty, Telly Tay, and Nate Nordell for joining me tonight. And this was a great Sips and Tips number 2. Like I said, August 25th, we're going to be shooting for Sips and Tips number 3. We're going to tackle kind of an overarching binding conversation. If you guys want to start thinking of specific questions, that's going to help kind of guide the conversation that night. And yeah, tell all your friends. We couldn't do this without you. We appreciate all you premium subscribers. And that's really what's pushing this forward. So thank you for being here, especially in the summertime. And we'll look forward to seeing you next time. So
Looks like
thanks.
we got one more question to answer.
one more?
Because it's true to my heart. Would it be legal for Smelly Knee Pad to bolt on a duck butt onto one of those old Alpine leather boots, run Outlaw X's on 200 centimeter skis? Absolutely not. The Smelly Knee Pad has a binding restriction as well, and bindings must be pre G3 Targa. So Outlaw X is not eligible for Smelly Knee Pad competition. And on that note, I'm done for the night. Thank you guys. Good stuff. Thanks for having me on tonight.
See you guys.